In the first raw minutes, after the tornado passed, the school had no power, no cell service, and no internet. And a hallway full of frightened students and teachers stood in the emergency lighting asking each other what to do and getting no answer because every device anyone reached for was dark. Then a voice crackled out of a battered gray box sitting on a table in the corner. A box built out of salvaged parts and duct tape that half the school had spent the semester laughing at, and the voice was Malcolm Hayes, 16 years old, calm and clear over the static. "Do not use the Eastern Bridge," he said. "The fire department says it's gone. Route everyone west through the old mill road. Repeat, the Eastern Bridge is gone." A teacher who 2 hours earlier had watched a Wealthier student's video mocking that exact box as a heap of junk now leaned toward it, and the whole hallway went quiet, listening to the only thing in the building that still worked. Outside, the sky had that bruised green-black color that country people learned to fear, and branches and shingles lay scattered across the parking lot, and somewhere a car alarm was crying into the wind. Inside, in the dim emergency light, 100 people who had been reaching helplessly for dead phones. A minute earlier now, stood absolutely still, turned toward a homemade radio hanging on the words of a 16-year-old they had spent a semester underestimating. It was the strangest reversal any of them had ever witnessed, and most of them did not yet grasp how completely the ground had shifted. That is where this story ends up. It starts somewhere much less dramatic in a school gym with a competition nobody thought Malcolm could win. Weeks before the storm, the school had announced a technology competition it called Future Ready, the kind of event that comes with a banner and a promise of scholarships and judges from local businesses. Students were to design and build a project demonstrating the technology of tomorrow, and from the moment it was announced, everyone assumed they already knew who would win. Connor Blake, 17, led a well-funded team building a drone platform, an impressive machine of sleek carbon fiber arms and high-resolution cameras and autonomous flight software, most of it paid for by his father's company. It looked like the future. It photographed beautifully. It was exactly the kind of thing a banner and a panel of judges was built to reward. Malcolm Hayes built something that looked like the past. He was a quiet, technically curious kid, more comfortable taking things apart than talking to people, and while other students ordered kits and components online, Malcolm went to the places where broken machines go to die. He gathered old railroad radio equipment, damaged printers. He stripped for their motors and gears batteries pulled from things people had thrown away, salvaged wire and switches and circuit boards, and out of all of it, he began to build a radio-based emergency message network. His idea was not to build the flashiest device. It was to build a way for people to communicate when the normal ways failed, when the cell towers went down and the internet died and the power quit, which Malcolm knew from listening to his grandfather was exactly when people most needed to reach each other and least could. To understand why a 16-year-old would spend a semester building something out of other people's garbage, you have to understand the household he came from and the two people who shaped how he saw the world. His grandfather was the reason Malcolm thought this way. Leon Hayes was a retired railroad radio operator, a man who had spent his working life keeping trains talking to each other across long stretches of country where there was nothing but track and weather. Leon kept an old railroad map on the wall of his room, and on the back of it in his own handwriting was a list of frequencies and call routines from the days when radio was the nervous system of the whole rail line. To Malcolm, that map with its secret writing on the back was a kind of treasure proof that his grandfather had once been part of an invisible web that held distant places together. Leon told stories, and the story that lodged deepest in Malcolm was about a flood decades earlier when the roads and the phone lines went under and the towns along the line were cut off from each other and from help. And the only thing that still connected them, the only way the trapped communities could coordinate rescue and supplies, was railroad radio. When everything modern quit, Leon said, the old thing that still worked wasn't old anymore. It was the only thing that was working. Malcolm never forgot it. Malcolm and Leon spent long evenings together, the boy asking questions and the old man answering them in the patient circling way of someone who has time. Leon taught him the fundamentals of radio, not as a school subject, but as a craft, how a signal travels, why terrain and weather bend it, why a message repeated in a fixed, simple format gets through when a rambling one does not. Why redundancy? saying the important thing more than one way. Sending it by more than one path is not waste, but insurance. He explained how the railroad had never trusted any single link, how the whole system had been built so that if one station went silent, the message could still find its way around. Malcolm did not realize it at the time, but Leon was handing him the entire design philosophy of what he would later build. The old man was also quietly handing him something else. The belief that his grandson's careful, unglamorous way of thinking was not a weakness to be apologized for, but a discipline that had once kept whole regions alive. For a reserved boy who did not shine in the ways his school rewarded, that belief was worth more than any grade. The railroad map on Leon's wall was the physical heart of it. It was creased and soft with age, and on the back, in Leon's small, precise hand, was the list frequencies, call signs, the routines of a vanished network, along with hand-drawn notes about the line itself. Sidings, water stops, a maintenance tunnel. Here, an old service road there, the accumulated geography of a man who had spent decades thinking about how to reach places most people never went. Malcolm loved that map the way other kids loved a video game. He did not know yet that one of the forgotten features scrawled on its back would, on the worst day of the year, help find a bus full of children. His mother, Tasha Hayes, was an emergency room nurse, and she gave the project its other half. From Tasha. Malcolm absorbed how emergencies actually unfold, not as one big event, but as a flood of information that has to be sorted fast. Who is hurt, and where, and how badly. What road is open, which ambulance can get through. Tasha knew what it was like when the information failed, when a call did not come through or came too late. And Malcolm grew up understanding that in a crisis, communication is not a convenience. It is the difference between help arriving and help arriving too late. He was building his network for the world his grandfather had described, and his mother worked inside every night. Tasha did not always understand the electronics, but she understood the stakes better than anyone, and she was the one who, on the nights Malcolm wanted to quit, reminded him without lecturing that the flashy projects won ribbons, and the plain ones sometimes won something else. She had come home too many times from shifts where the difference between a good outcome and a terrible one had come down to whether the right information reached the right person in time. When Malcolm described his message code to her location, "Danger people need," she recognized it instantly because it was more or less how nurses handed off a patient, the essential facts stripped of everything that could wait. "That's triage," she told him. "You built triage for a whole county." He had not thought of it that way, but she was right, and the idea that his box of scrap was really a way of triaging a disaster gave him a language for what he was doing that no judge in the competition ever offered him. The teacher running the competition. Owen Barrett was not a villain, but he had a blind spot, and the blind spot was that he confused novelty with usefulness. Barrett taught STEM, and he loved the future, and the future to him looked like Connor's drone, sleek, autonomous, visually exciting, the kind of thing that photographed well for the district newsletter. Radio struck him as outdated, a technology from his grandfather's era, and he could not see past its plainness to what it did. When Malcolm demonstrated an early version of his message network, Barrett was politely unimpressed. "It works, but where's the wow?" he said. "Show me something that feels like tomorrow." He was not trying to be cruel. He simply could not imagine a tomorrow in which the flashy thing failed and the plain thing was all that was left, because he had never lived through the kind of day that teaches you that lesson. Connor was less gentle. He recorded a video making fun of Malcolm's project, panning across the duct-taped box and the salvaged parts, calling it a junk box. And the video went around the school and got its laughs. Connor was not a monster either. He was a confident kid who had always had the best equipment and had come to believe, without ever examining it, that the best equipment made the best person. Mockery came easily to him because he had never needed to build anything out of what other people discarded. The laughter stung, and it spread the way these things do. The phrase, "junk box," following Malcolm down hallways in the mouths of kids who had never seen his project and never would. He was reserved to begin with, not given to fighting back in public, and the mockery landed on exactly the tender place where a quiet, careful person is most easily wounded. The suspicion never far off that the thing you love and the way you think are simply worth less than the shinier things other people have. He seriously considered withdrawing from the competition altogether, taking the box home and dismantling it and being done. There is a particular exhaustion in pouring yourself into something real and watching it be dismissed as trash by people who have never wanted for anything, and Malcolm felt all of it. What made it worse was that on the surface Connor was not wrong. The thing did look like junk. It was junk gloriously and deliberately, and Malcolm had not yet found the words to explain that this was the entire point, that a device built from what disaster leaves behind is a device disaster cannot easily take away. It was Leon who kept him in it with the flood story and with a question. Whose phone works when the tower falls down? The old man asked. Nobody's. That's the whole point of what you're building. You're not building it for the good day, you're building it for the bad one. And Malcolm had a partner who saw it too. Sofia Alvarez, 16, was a classmate with a gift for weather analysis and mapping, and she found Malcolm's project genuinely interesting, where others found it dull. Together, they did something the drone team never thought to do. They studied where the technology would actually matter. Sophia helped Malcolm map the cellular dead zones around their county, the places where normal coverage was already weak or non-existent. And the map told a story that neither of them forgot. The dead zones were not random. They fell over the farms on the county's edge, the low-income neighborhoods, the rural roads, the nursing home out past the highway. The communities with the weakest coverage on a normal day, the ones a network like Malcolm's could most help in a crisis, were exactly the communities that already got the least. The people most vulnerable when things went wrong were the people the existing system already served worst. Making that map was its own education for both of them. Sophia gathered coverage data and drove the county's back roads with Malcolm on weekends, checking signal bars against the map, marking the places where the phone simply stopped working. They stood in a gravel lot outside the nursing home and watched the signal die. They drove the road past the farms where Malcolm knew families would be on their own in any real emergency. And Malcolm, whose own neighborhood sat in one of those weaker zones, understood the map in his gut and not just his head. He had grown up in a place where things arrived last and left first, where the plowing came late and the repairs came slow, and the coverage map was just one more picture of a pattern he had lived his whole life. His family was not poor exactly, but money was watched carefully in the Hayes house, which was part of why Malcolm built from salvage in the first place, not only as a principle but as a fact of what he could afford. The drone team ordered parts. Malcolm went to the scrapyard. The competition would treat that difference as a measure of ambition. Malcolm knew it was a measure of budget, and he had decided stubbornly to make it a strength instead of a shame. That map changed the project from a science fair entry into something Malcolm believed in. He stopped trying to build one impressive radio and started thinking about resilience, about how a communication system survives a disaster instead of just working on a calm day. His first big design decision came out of that thinking. Instead of one powerful transmitter, which would be a single point of failure, he would build several small relay nodes, spread out, each able to receive a message and pass it along to the next. If one node went down, the others could still route around it. The network would carry short, structured messages. Location danger people need a simple code, so that even in chaos, the essential information got through in a form people could act on. It was though Malcolm did not use these words, a design built around the assumption that things would break, which is the opposite of how the drone was designed, and the whole difference between them. Building it taught him failure over and over, which was the point. The first prototype worked beautifully indoors, and then failed across the uneven terrain of the real county, the hills and tree lines blocking the signal between nodes that had talked fine across a classroom. He learned that radio at these power levels needs line of sight or clever relaying, and he had to rethink where nodes could go. The batteries drained too fast when a node transmitted continuously, so Malcolm redesigned the system to send in short bursts and then listen, sipping power instead of gulping it, holding messages and forwarding them in packets, a store and forward approach that let a node stay alive far longer on a salvaged battery. The wind moved his antennas and turned steady signals into intermittent ones, so he learned to mount and guide them properly to weatherproof the connections, to build for the storm instead of the calm. He adapted copper tubing into antennas wired in batteries scavenged from bicycles and other cast-offs, sealed the electronics into weatherproof boxes. Each of these failures arrived as a small heartbreak and left as a lesson, and Malcolm kept a notebook of them, the way his grandfather had once kept logs. The terrain problem taught him to place nodes on high points and to accept that he needed more of them, smaller and cheaper, rather than fewer and stronger. The battery problem taught him that a network that talks constantly dies quickly, and that discipline sending, briefly listening, mostly, was survival. The wind problem taught him that in a disaster, the enemy is not only the loss of signal, but the intermittent signal, the connection that comes and goes and cannot be trusted, and that a rock-steady weak link beats a strong link that flickers. He tested in the rain on purpose. He kicked the tripods to see what came loose. He left a node running for 3 days to find out when the battery quit. He was doing without a lab or a budget the one thing the polished drone project never did. He was trying to break his own creation before the world could, so that when the world tried, it would hold. Every failure taught him something. The drone team, with their clean bench and their bought parts, never had to learn how a thing behaves when the conditions turn against it. Sophia built the other half of the system, the human half. A network is useless if people do not know how to use it under stress. So she developed a concise emergency message code, a small fixed vocabulary that let anyone report the essentials, fast and unambiguously, and she drew a paper map showing where every node was placed, so the network did not depend on any screen or any power to be understood. Paper. Malcolm and Sophia agreed was a feature, not a limitation. Paper works in the dark. Paper works when the battery is dead. They were building for the moment when everything else had quit, and they kept that moment in front of them the whole time. Getting Chief Daniels to take a couple of teenagers seriously was its own small victory, and it happened because Malcolm did not oversell. He did not promise the chief a miracle. He laid out exactly what the network could and could not do, where it would work, and where terrain would defeat it, how many nodes he had, and how long their batteries lasted. Daniels, who had spent his life around people who talked bigger than they delivered, noticed the honesty. "You're the first person to demo something to me and start by telling me what it can't do," he said. He agreed to a limited drill. The drill worked, and it worked in exactly the unglamorous way Malcolm had promised. On a gray afternoon, the volunteers scattered across the county to positions where cell coverage was known to be weak, and Sophia ran the message board while Malcolm managed the nodes and structured reports moved from the far edge of the map back to the fire station node to node, each one short and clear in Sophia's code location, danger people need. There was nothing to photograph. A message simply arrived where a phone call could not have gone. But the volunteer firefighters, practical people who cared about what worked rather than what looked impressive, watched a report come in from a dead zone and understood immediately what they were seeing, and several of them said so. One older volunteer told Malcolm that in 30 years he had watched 3 different disasters, where the thing that failed first was the ability to talk to each other, and that a kid with a box of scrap had just addressed the problem the county kept pretending it didn't have. But the school administration would not approve permanent installation of the nodes because the system was not part of an approved certified emergency plan, and schools run on approved plans. It was a reasonable bureaucratic position, and it left the network in limbo, proven in a drill and officially non-existent. Then the competition's preliminary round arrived, and it went exactly as everyone had predicted. Connor's drone put on a spectacular demonstration, rising over the gymnasium, streaming crisp aerial video to a big screen, executing autonomous maneuvers to applause. Malcolm demonstrated a message passing quietly from one gray box to another, which on a calm day in a well-lit gym with full cell service looked like nothing at all. Barrett and the judges advanced Connor and eliminated Malcolm as insufficiently futuristic. On a normal day in a normal room, the flashy thing beat the plain thing, because a normal day gives the plain thing no way to show what it is for. Malcolm packed up his junk box and went home, and the competition final was scheduled for the following week, and everyone moved on. Everyone except the weather. On the day of the final, a tornado warning was issued for the region. The competition organizers checked the forecast, saw that the main track of the storm was projected to pass north of the town, and decided to continue the event. A normal, reasonable call, the kind of call that is right most of the time. But Sophia was watching the radar on her phone, and she was better at reading it than the organizers, and she saw something that made her grab Malcolm's arm, a rapid shift in the wind, and a change in the storm's movement that the earlier projection had not accounted for. The storm was not going to stay north. It was turning toward them. Sophia showed Malcolm her phone, the radar loop, the hook shape forming where the earlier forecast had promised nothing, the wind barbs swinging around. She had studied this. She knew what a rapidly rotating storm looked like on radar, and what it meant when the motion vector bent toward a town instead of past it. "It's coming here," she said, and she was not guessing. Maybe 20 minutes, less. They went to an organizer with it, and the organizer reasonably deferred to the official forecast, and the schedule, and the room full of people, because that is what committees do, and because Sophia was a 16-year-old with a phone, not the National Weather Service. There was no time to convince a committee, and Malcolm understood in a compressed and frightening few seconds that waiting for permission was going to cost more than acting without it. He made a decision that could have gotten him in serious trouble. He activated his unapproved backup nodes, the ones the school had refused to sanction moving fast, to power up the network minutes before the first warning siren positioning, what he could checking the links. As it happened, he brought the network up before that siren failed, so that when the storm knocked out the town's official warning systems, one unofficial network was already alive and listening. The tornado did not destroy the whole town because real storms are usually more surgical and more cruel than total cutting one path and sparing the next street. But along its path, it did what tornadoes do. It tore down power lines and damaged two of the area's cellular towers, and in an instant, the modern world went dark. The school lost its internet, its public address system, its phones, its cell service, all at once. The drone that had won the preliminary round was suddenly useless. Connor, to his credit, tried. He wanted to help, and his instinct was to reach for the tool he trusted to put the drone up and survey the damage and find the people who needed finding. But the same strong swirling winds that made the storm deadly made stable flight impossible, and the aircraft that had executed such crisp autonomous maneuvers in the calm of the gymnasium was tossed and battered the moment it cleared the shelter of the building, and within seconds it was down and broken on the wet ground. Connor stood over it, and something in his face broke a little too, because he was watching the thing he had staked his whole confidence on fail at the exact moment it was supposed to prove itself. The technology that photographed so beautifully on a calm day could not fly on the day it was needed, and the drill of everyday admiration it had won meant nothing now. And Malcolm's supposedly obsolete network, built on the assumption that everything else would fail, came into its own. He connected with an amateur radio operator across the county and with the volunteer fire station patching his student-built relay network into the wider web of people who still had radio when nothing else survived. Structured messages began to flow. A node near the nursing home reported residents trapped by fallen debris. Nora Fields, the administrator, using the simple code Sophia had taught, getting word out that no phone could have carried. The nursing home sat in one of the worst of the dead zones, the very place Malcolm's map had flagged months earlier as most vulnerable and least served, and now that prediction was coming true in real time. An entire building of elderly residents, some of them unable to move on their own, cut off from every normal way of calling for help. But there was a node there because Malcolm's map had told him to put one there, and so Nora Fields could report exactly what she had: the number of people, the nature of the danger, the specific need for lifting equipment and hands in a form Chief Daniels could act on. The map that had shown where the system failed, people had become the map that showed where to place the thing that wouldn't. Another node reported that the eastern bridge had washed out the warning that would come out of the gray box in the school hallway. The network Malcolm and Sophia had built was doing exactly what they had designed it for, carrying the essential facts: where, what danger, how many people, what need across a county that had otherwise gone silent. And here, the story refuses to become the story of a lone hero, because that is not how it actually worked, and pretending otherwise would betray the whole point. When Connor's drone went down, Malcolm did not gloat, and he did not shut him out. He looked at Connor, shaken, useless, his expensive machine broken on the ground, and he handed him a job. "I need a relay node carried to the shelter and set up," Malcolm said. "You know how to position equipment. Go." And Connor went, because underneath the confidence he was not a bad kid, and being given something useful to do in a disaster is its own kind of rescue for a person who has just watched his identity crash into the dirt. Connor carried the node, placed it well, extended the network's reach. He had spent months believing that his value lay in owning the most impressive machine, and in the space of an afternoon, he learned that his value in a crisis was something plainer and more human. A strong kid who could run through debris with a heavy box and set it up where it was told. He did it well and without complaint, and when he came back he did not ask for credit. He asked what to carry next. Something had rearranged itself in him. Watching his own drone fail and then being handed a real job by the boy he had mocked was, it turned out, the most useful thing that had ever happened to Connor Blake, though it would take him a while to understand that. He became in the emergency part of the thing he had mocked, and the network was better for it because a network is only ever as good as the number of people willing to pass the message along. The network filled up fast, and that created a problem Malcolm had not fully prepared for. So many messages came in, every kind of request, urgent and less urgent all at once, that the network began to congest more traffic than the small nodes and their careful bursts could carry. Malcolm had to make hard choices in real time, prioritizing life safety messages over everything else, holding back the general requests so the critical ones got through. His mother's hospital needed a safe route for ambulances and supply vehicles, and that had to come before someone asking about a downed fence. He learned in the middle of the crisis the thing. Every emergency dispatcher knows that when the channel is limited, deciding what not to send is as important as sending, and that the decisions are agonizing because everything feels urgent to the person who sent it. He leaned on Sophia's message code to do it because the code was what made triage possible. A report that led with its priority could be sorted in an instant, and a network that could sort could survive being overwhelmed. He also leaned on the store and forward design he had fought so hard to build, letting lower priority messages wait in a node's memory and go out when the channel cleared so that nothing was lost, even when nothing could be sent immediately. It was, he realized later, the moment all his failures paid off at once, the terrain lesson and the battery lesson and the congestion. He had not fully anticipated, all met by a system he had built to bend instead of break. He kept the code strict and the life safety traffic moving, and the network held. It did not hold because it was powerful. It held because it had been designed from the first salvaged part for the assumption that it would be pushed past its limits. Then came the crisis that tested everything, the one that could not be solved by any single person. A school bus carrying younger children was missing. It had gone out before the storm turned and had not reported in. And then a weak, incomplete transmission appeared on the network and vanished before the driver could give a location. Just a fragment, a cut-off voice gone. Somewhere in the storm's path there was a bus full of small children, and no one knew where, and the floodwater from the storm was rising. Malcolm felt the fear of it in a way that was not abstract, because his mother had raised him on what happens when help arrives too late, and because he could picture the children small belted into their seats, watching water climb the windows in the dark. For a moment, the responsibility nearly froze him. Then he did what his grandfather had taught him to do when a signal seemed lost, which was to stop wishing for a better signal and start working with the one you had. Malcolm did not find them by magic, and he did not find them alone. He found them by combining three things, each held by a different person. From his own network, he had the arrival times of that weak transmission as recorded by three separate relay nodes. The same signal reaching three known locations at slightly different strengths and moments, which taken together pointed toward a rough area the signal had come from. This was not something he could have done with a single powerful radio. It was only possible because he had built many small nodes spread across the county, and because each one logged what it heard and when. Three nodes had caught the fragment by comparing which node heard it strongest, and the tiny differences in timing and signal strength between them. Malcolm could draw a rough region, not a precise dot, but a wedge of the map, a place to start, which in a search is the difference between everything and nothing. The design decision the judges had found unimpressive, the choice of many humble nodes over one grand transmitter, was the exact thing that now made it possible to locate a missing bus. From Sophia, he had her storm and flood map showing which roads were already underwater and which were still passable, narrowing the possible locations to where a bus could actually be. And from Leon. From the back of that old railroad map, he had something no modern map showed, an abandoned maintenance tunnel and the old service road beside it, a place a frightened driver might have pulled toward for shelter, a place that did not appear on any GPS. Malcolm laid the three together, the signal triangulation, the flood map, the railroad map, and they converged on one stretch of road beside the old tunnel. He radioed the location to Chief Daniels, not a certainty. He was careful to say, but the best estimate 3 kinds of evidence could produce a stretch of road beside the old tunnel where the wedge from the signal and the passable roads from the flood map and the forgotten service road from Leon's map all overlapped. Daniels trusted it enough to commit his people, and the trust was itself a thing Malcolm had earned in the drill weeks earlier by never overstating what he had. The rescuers went to the tunnel road and they found the bus. There pulled over where a frightened driver had sought the shelter of higher ground, the water rising against its wheels and climbing toward the passenger compartment, but not yet inside it, the children still dry and belted in and scared. They got them out in time carrying the smallest ones, and the water took the road not long after. Minutes had mattered, and the minutes had been bought by a chain of ordinary people, each holding one piece of a puzzle none of them could have solved alone. It took all of them. Malcolm had built the system and made the call. Sophia had read the weather and mapped the water. Leon had preserved the map in the memory of a tunnel the county had forgotten. Connor had carried a node that extended the network's reach, and trained rescuers, not students, had done the actual dangerous work of the rescue. No one person saved that bus. A network of people saved it, which was the very thing Malcolm's network had been designed to be, not one powerful hero, but many small nodes, each passing the message along, routing around whatever had failed. When the storm was over and the count was done and everyone was accounted for, the town understood slowly what the gray box had done. The school, which had refused to approve the network, now adopted a tested and properly reviewed version of it as part of its emergency plan instruments to extend the community's reach with trained people still at the center, exactly the right lesson. Malcolm did not patent his design or try to get rich from it. He published the basic plans freely so that other schools and other rural communities, especially the ones in the dead zones, his map had revealed could build their own resilient networks out of salvaged parts and careful thinking. He chose to give it away for a reason he could have drawn on Sophia's map. The communities that needed a resilient network. Most were the ones with the least money to buy. One, the same dead zones the coverage map had exposed, and a design that only wealthy schools could afford, would have failed the exact people it was meant to protect. Free plans buildable from salvage went where a product for sale never would. The victory was not a prize or a payout. It was that the next town over and the one after that could now build the thing that had kept his own community talking when everything else went silent. Connor changed, and he changed the honest way through action rather than apology. He did not make a speech. He went to his father and arranged for the family's resources to be used to manufacture durable weatherproof enclosures for the network's nodes, taking the one thing he genuinely had money and manufacturing access and putting it in service of the thing he had mocked. Barrett changed too. He admitted to Malcolm and to his class that he had confused novelty with usefulness, that he had been so dazzled by what looked like tomorrow that he had missed what would actually work when tomorrow went wrong. Neither of them was ruined or humiliated. They were simply usefully corrected, and they became better for it, which is what actually happens to decent people who get something important wrong and are big enough to see it. Barrett even began teaching the story to his next classes, not as a lesson about radios, but as a lesson about what he called the tyranny of the demonstration, the way a science fair or a boardroom or a whole culture can reward the thing that performs on the easy day and overlook the thing that saves you on the hard one. And Malcolm was careful always about what his system was and was not. It did not replace the professionals. It did not make him a superhero. It helped ordinary people reach the trained rescuers in the hospitals and the fire department when the normal infrastructure failed, a bridge, not a substitute for the emergency services that did the real work. He said as much whenever anyone tried to make him the whole story, because he had learned from his mother what emergency response actually is, and it is never one person. The ending Malcolm cared about most was a quiet one. When the expanded network was finished and properly installed across the county, they scheduled its first official test, and Leon Hayes was there to hear it. The old railroad radio operator who had once kept distant towns talking across empty country, who had told a discouraged boy about a flood. When the old thing that still worked wasn't old anymore, sat and listened as the network he had inspired came alive with its first scheduled test signal carrying a clear voice across the whole county from node to node. And Malcolm set the radio on the table in front of them, the same gray box, or one just like it, built from salvage and duct tape and stubbornness. When its signal sounded clean and strong, nobody in the room laughed. Leon reached over and put his hand on his grandson's shoulder, and Malcolm understood that the old man was hearing more than a test tone. He was hearing the flood he had survived and the network he had once kept alive, and the proof at last that the thing he had carried all these years had been worth handing down. Tasha was there too, still in her scrubs, having come from a hospital that had made it through the worst night in its history, partly because a route had stayed open when it mattered. 3 generations of one family sat around a table listening to a box of salvage to the one thing it had been built to do, and for once the room understood exactly what it was hearing. Here's what stays with me about a story like this one. We tend to measure technology by how impressive it looks when everything is working, how fast, how sleek, how much it dazzles us on the calm, well-lit day of the demonstration. But that is the easiest test there is, and it hides the only question that finally matters, which is what happens when the power goes out. The drone was better than the radio in every way that a normal day could measure, and worse than the radio in the one way that the worst day required. Real resilience is almost never flashy. It is redundant, humble, over-prepared, a little ugly, designed by someone who assumed that things would break and built for that moment instead of against it. The best tools, and maybe the best people, are the ones who are still there, still working, still passing the message along after everything else has gone quiet. So let me leave you with a question, and I'd love to read your answer in the comments. What is something in your own life, a skill, a habit, a relationship, an old and unglamorous tool that no one values on the good days, but that you know you'll be grateful for on the worst one? If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to subscribe, because every week we bring you another story about ordinary people who were underestimated right up until the moment everyone needed them, and I'd be honored to have you here for the next one.